Thank you for joining us today, ladies and gentlemen. I always want to promote DoSpace. I'm here in Colorado. I am not a member of the staff. I don't get a commission, but I think what they do is wonderful and really is an example for other community institutions around North America. I hope more people copy their model. And DoSpace is a community technology library dedicated to empowering our community through access to technology and innovative learning experiences. And for those of you who don't know me, I've been a trainer and consultant since 1978. Now, currently, probably 85% of the work I do is with libraries and universities, but I've worked with government, from federal agencies to local government in small towns. I've worked with organizations from big multinational corporations to small businesses and charities of all sizes as well. Also, my husband and I have been in business since 1975, and we have clients all over the world that we have to respond to in different ways. And yes, we're at the receiving ends of requests where, oh no, this channel won't work. I just got something from a client in Kansas, and whatever she was doing at her end at her bank was not communicating with my Apple computer. And she's like a wizard at technology, but it still took us 10 minutes to figure out what the heck was going on. And yes, in the beginning, it was postcards and phone calls. And I think it's interesting from a cultural point of view that there was a time in our office that we would get 100 phone calls a day on our landline from our clients. And now I'm lucky if I get 2 or 3. But I have to say, as a caveat, when things go south and everything else is blowing up, I do pick up the phone. I've worked with call centers. I've taught people at call centers how to respond. I have reviewed information at tech desks at different kinds. One of my specialties is working with technology people who have to be the service people for people who are emailing in and calling in. And I have sat with managers and reviewed probably hundreds of email responses to customer queries, because we're always trying to improve the product. So not only am I somebody who helps this, I'm a customer just like you. So I have the things I like and I don't like as well. The key idea for the program today is an understanding that a lot of small businesses, big companies, whatever, people want virtual customer service. And what we want to do is to remind them that it doesn't mean that it's going to cost less. It's going to be about response time. It's about being able to document things better, but it doesn't necessarily mean a big money saving. And that can be a surprise to people who are trying to move their customer service from face to face over. And I have been doing this long enough that I've now seen people moving from the virtual world back to the person-to-person world, which I think is sort of interesting as well. So there's 5 things that we hope happen out of the program today. One of them is that you'll start after the program identifying what kind of current resources are available to you for creating online customer service. And my thing is, keep them cheap, keep them things that you can get in and out of contracts easily. Beware of being the beta test site for something that nobody knows about. And as much as I think great software is created outside the United States, I'm old school enough that I want to know where their office building is. So if push comes to shove, I can drive up to the front desk and say, I want to talk to the manager. So I like the fact that other people have tested it and the software's been around. Also, and this may contradict some things you've heard from other people. I admit it's a minority report that I think sometimes we buy software to deal with these issues and they have every single feature in the world, which means they have that many ways to fail. It's like, oh, I have this great device and it's a vacuum and it's a toaster and it'll iron my shirts and it'll buff my clothes and it'll feed the cats. No, I want something simple, even if it means I need 1 or 2 extra simple applications that work very well. Um, hope this helps you set some priorities. Which kind of service do you want to try first, because you want to test things? I have to say that for some of the things we've done for our little business here, we've had to go through 12 different vendors to find something that worked for us pretty good. And then all we need is for someone to change their operating system or to do an update that isn't supported across the board by the major computers or phone systems or something like that. And it's like we have to start from scratch. So you have to be kind of resigned to the fact that, as I've said in other programs, you're not buying my mom's vacuum cleaner, her Hoover vacuum cleaner that she bought in the late 40s that was still running when I cleaned out her condo in 2017. That's not going to be happening. Also, you want to kind of triage which of the groups are going to be served best and first. And I've noticed in our own business, when we started moving a lot of the stuff online, we were lucky because our prime clients were libraries and universities, most of which not only were early adopters of technology, but oftentimes when you come to public libraries, and I know this is true of Nebraska, it was often the public library that was the first agency in that city, town, county that actually went digital. So got to work with people who had some experience. And then there's other people who are slow adopters and some people who aren't ever going to make it. And so we want to think of that idea of what about the people who probably aren't going to go digital, aren't going to be able to use virtual services. What are we going to do with them in the meantime? Weigh the pros and cons for your own workplace and be really honest with yourself about how much it's going to cost, because you shouldn't feel bullied by friends and family and other industries saying, oh, you should do A, B, and C, if it's still simpler for you to pick up a phone and deal with people that way. So I don't want you to feel that everything we're talking about today is a solution for you, rather to be real critical about what it is you're trying to do and what your customers want. And if nothing else, to start creating test service projects. And I mentioned this later, that we are lucky because we have long-term relationships with our customers. And so when we have acquired new software to deal with customer service issues, I know 20 folks who I can email and say, hey, we're going to have a test thing. Do you want to do it? And if it requires you paying some money, one of the things we do is say, would you like us to send you money back to reimburse you for testing, like a payment system? Or do you want us to donate the money to a charity? And then we give them 3 or 4 choices of charities. And it's nice, most of our customers will say, oh, donate it to a charity, whatever. But it's great that we have critical people. And I have to say, everybody needs a Gail. Gail is one of my best friends. She is so smart, makes your teeth bleed from the altitude. And she's an absolute negative critical thinker about almost everything, has a lot of experience with technology. So we have sort of this thing of, oh, we're trying something new in our office. Let's have Gail test it, because she'll rip the technology apart and send us a list with 20 things that are wrong with it, even though at the end she might say, you know, this isn't too bad. But we don't want people who are just going to tell us how nice things are. So planning those little tests, I think, are really important. So what are we going to talk about? First of all, of course, the free myth having to do with technology and virtual customer service. We're going to talk about the strategic steps, meaning the big picture steps that we're doing, planning with mission and vision and target audience. And then we're going to talk about the operation steps, the ultra practical things that we need to do, including things that we teach people to say in an email, how to structure an email, how to structure a text. And yes, even though this is about the virtual world, I am including phone conferences and talking to people on the telephone, because I still find even big companies have a problem. And I am in the midst of a conversation, I'm being very polite here, with a major corporation. I'm not going to mention their name. Their initials are AT&T, because I spent 45 minutes on the phone with people who were increasingly inadequate to solve a simple problem. It was just amazing. So yeah, we're going to learn about how to be on the phone. and then talk about other kind of typical problems and some first steps that you might take as well. Okay, so what we're doing is talking about going online with customer interaction, but it's more than that. It's not just communicating with your customers or clients, it's all of your stakeholders, right? Your vendors, virtual personnel, which if you haven't experienced before, you get to experience now in the 21st century. Your allies, the other associations, group, trade organization, chamber of commerce, all the different people you deal with, and other agencies, including government agencies as well. I'm lucky because I have a, let's say, maybe not bleeding edge, but cutting edge law firm, cutting edge banking firm that I'm working with, an accounting firm. So working with them where we have these protected portals to be able to share information, yeah, I had to figure this out a little bit. It wasn't intuitive at first, but boy, having people like that as partners where we can safely swap documents, excuse me, and keep them up to date with what we're doing is really important. And we want to think about the fact that it's not just one system. It's email and texting, any kind of instant messaging system that many of your people might be using. So even if I'm not using some sort of IM system, what if my customers are? And that's their preference. Some of my customers prefer social media, and it's an interesting balance because some of my customers are not allowed to use social media at work, and they have filters against that. Other people prefer it because it's a way of privately to communicate with people, particularly like through Facebook messaging or something. And then there are people where it's web-based. And that's a choice people make. And all I'm going to say is that my experience with a lot of web-based services is that they can be very good as long as they're not, and we've got three mantras, they are not tedious, they are not confusing, right? And they are not a burden to people, so that you don't have to think, oh my goodness, it's going to be 10 minutes to fill out this form, and nothing on the form matches what I as a customer want to tell them. So I always warn people, if you're doing web-based stuff, if you are too annoying, you're going to have, you know, the empty cart. People will likely to be abandon your agency or your organization and feel hostile and negative if that web-based experience of communicating with them is too onerous. And that's something that you only know by finding friendly people who don't know how the system works and ask them to log in and see what you're missing. We're all too close to our own stuff. So one of the things I suggest people do is wherever you are in this process, you might already have some kind of virtual system in place. You may never have had anything. You might have a lot of experience. But what I'd like to do is to have people score themselves in a very practical way from 1 to 10, 1 meaning we aren't doing a good job at all, or we haven't even started, and 10 being we're doing a terrific job. So if you came to me and you said, either we're starting to put a system in, or we have one in place and we want to see if we can do better, here's the questions I would ask. First of all, do you have a technology plan in place that's not just a piece of paper, but is actually operational, about money and time and resources and goals and mission and all that good stuff, so that you have something written in place that's shared with staff that helps you set priorities based on goals that you all share about what we're doing and why we're doing it. Does our workplace technology work well? And this must be obvious to people, but in some places I have visited, the technology hasn't been very good, and yet either the people at the top of the food chain don't think it's worth the money to change it, or what's scary is the people at the top of the food chain fell in love with some beta version of something and kind of imposed it. I think the word is inflicted it on the people who actually have to answer the service calls and so on, and it doesn't work very well. So I want to make sure that not only the big technology works well, and by that I mean, for example, the servers, but what people have at their desks. like headsets and mouses, right? Mice, and email that works. I mean, all those things work well every single day. That the technology team is competent, that they have the training and the support they need to get things done, and they are people who love to learn. If I'm hiring people for technology, the number one thing I want is people who love to learn new stuff all the time. And number two, they're kind of equal, the people who actually like human beings, who aren't technology geeks because they hate people. My husband was a system analyst and programmer for 25 years, and I got to hear and see him interact with the people on his team and with their customers who are all over the world. And I'll tell you, people love to work with him because not only is he wicked smart and yes, very good looking, but he also was great with people and had that patience. That there's budget for upgrades and training. We designed a database system a few years ago. I mean, I was there sort of just, making sure my husband was fed and hydrated, but he created a really good system. And with our first customer we sold it to, that was an independent education organization with 30,000 students. And the semesters, I think there were 10 semesters a year, something like that. We required in our contract that there would be money for upgrades because we knew the system would need to be upgraded, but most importantly, there was money for training, meaning paid time for people to leave where they were and sit in a room once a week for an hour for 10 weeks and learn how the system ran. And the director of the agency wanted to cut that out of the contract. And we've said no training, no contract. And at the end, they were happy we did that because of the productivity issues. Again, you would think everyone has working email, that people can reach each other easily. I mean, this is a very interesting issue when you're talking about trying to provide the new 21st century standard of 24/7. So on this big project I'm working on right now, big for our little business, of working with people spread over a couple of dozen public sector agencies, we want to make sure that everyone who's involved, our customers, have multiple ways to reach us. So they have phone numbers and email and alternate phone numbers and at least 3 different platforms that they can reach us. Plus, if need be, they know where I live and they can reach me. And that the social media sites that you use to communicate with your customers are well managed. They're up to date, they're refreshed frequently, the information is correct in terms of phone numbers. Again, I work all over the United States, and so many times I'm trying to reach a new customer and I go to their website or go to their social media site and I find the information is a year or two out of date. So some of those little basic things make a big difference, and people don't think about them because they don't think they're important or flashy. But oftentimes, if you do some of this stuff really well, you don't have to buy expensive software to do your customer service. Then you have to look at yourself. If you've never done this before, this is for people who are just sticking their toe in the water about transferring some of their person-to-person stuff into the virtual world. How well have the people who work with you and for you been prepared for virtual customer service? Has it been discussed with employees, particularly the ones who will actually be executing the stuff, the people at the front line? What are their problems? What are their concerns? What are their issues? Right? They may be the one who said, well, you know what? I couldn't get a new monitor on my desk for like 2 years. And so when am I going to get the new monitor? And that doesn't sound like it's important, but it's the kind of thing that sticks in person's mind and makes that person less ready to adapt change. People say, oh, folks are resistant to change. I don't find that as an issue personally. What people are resistant to is suddenly waking up one morning and having a whole bunch of new stuff that they need to do without adequate preparation, without them being given the chance to have input on what's going on and how it's going on. What new resources are needed? Resources are a euphemism for money and people. And a lot of times people think, okay, we're just going to have everybody working very, very hard, and now they're going to have to spend another 10 hours a week learning the new system, but we're not going to let them take anything off their plate. And then we lie to ourselves and other people about how much stuff costs. And it's heartbreaking because the people I work with are very conscientious people. They step up to the plate, and you know what? They burn themselves out sometimes trying to meet unreasonable demands of people above them in the food chain. And I've sat in rooms with managers and administrators who have bluntly said, no, they're going to have to do all this new stuff in the transition to virtual customer service. And no, they're going to have to do their regular jobs and pick up my laundry, and they're not allowed to stop doing anything. And then they wonder why people are cynical and apathetic and why the morale drops. And if you are speaking about this and you have an established virtual programs in place, if you have a whole system in place, is there anything you need to do differently? And one of the reasons that I think it's great to spend time looking at other people's systems is that you get an idea what you can do better. So even though we're a little incy-bincy company, you know, a ma pa shop running out of our bungalow in central Denver, I spend time online, not just shopping and looking at kitten videos, but also seeing how big retailers and big training firms and organizations handle their websites, handle their communication, to see what I need to learn to do what I do better. Which ones do I prefer? Which ones do customers prefer? Which websites and systems get the highest ratings in terms of customer satisfaction? What can I learn from them? So that's kind of the research that goes on. And I notice that every 3 to 5 years, everything changes. Sometimes in ways I don't think it's useful, but sometimes I do. Like there was a big change, if you noticed 2 or 3 years ago, where suddenly everyone made their type very big. And there used to be this artistic thing of making all the type small and gray and nobody could read it. And now suddenly websites like Blue Cross Blue Shield and United Airlines and Wells Fargo, big companies, big institutions, are making things simpler. I need to know more about that to do a better job. So let's start looking through some of these ideas. And the first thing, of course, is the free myth. The free myth is, first of all, well, it's people and they're already salaried, or we already are wage earners. We don't plan to hire anybody else. They'll just sort of shoehorn this into what they're already doing. And a couple of things people sometimes don't understand, that first of all, there will be lost time on other tasks. And so during the transition, the quality of response to what people need might actually drop as people try to juggle what they need to do. The actual work you're doing might actually drop, the products and services, while you figure about this, because you need things like research time and so on. Another thing is, yes, there's a likelihood that as you implement new systems, even though you're being totally reasonable, you're going to lose customers for whatever reason. People are saying, the heck with you. I don't want to deal with this at all. That's a fact. And I've seen this happen more than once, that the new system might be so successful that the number of customers and clients contacting you increases. And I know a library that was very successful at putting in a whole virtual service thing in terms of all the things you could do online. And the workload increased so much that the staff of the library actually sued their managers and sued the library, which was in a city, to say that we're being treated unfairly because we need more help because of the expansion of what we're doing. So, be careful what you wish for. Sometimes it's the technology. A few years ago, my husband and I produced a book, and it was nice, and we did desktop publishing and everything. During the period that we were planning to do the book, which had illustrations and fancy type, we basically went through 9 sets of software. bought and discarded, upgraded, bought and discarded, upgraded, bought and discarded, 9 different software until we found the one that worked the best for us. The same thing with hardware is that you might find that what you're trying to do realistically doesn't suit what you already have. So you think everything's in place until you start dealing with the burden of actually doing virtual customer service, and then suddenly bought, discarded, upgraded. You might need new phone lines. You might need landlines because you find out that you thought you were clever and you're just working from cell phones and it doesn't work. You might have to upgrade your Wi-Fi, which may be difficult if you're in a community that doesn't have access to high-speed choices that really have the bandwidth that you need to do a good job. Suddenly, you have all these different mobile devices and people expect that you're going to be able to serve them. Increased power bills. By the way, I showed my husband, who has very practical experience with some of these things, the list that's on this list, and the one that he noticed was, yep, increased power bills. And we did something a few years ago, uh, and I won't go into details. All I'm going to say, and I'm not making this up, that it increased our power bill in 1 month by 5 times. We're paying 500% more. And we backed off from doing that, but that was sort of a shock. And that whole thing again of keeping up with your customers' technology, what they need, what they want, what they expect from you. So if you're going into this, here's some of the things that you want to ask. Is everyone on board? Your frontline staff, the people who will be answering the phones, the people who will be doing the email, the supervisors, the managers. I've run into situations in the last year where everyone wasn't on board, and when the new technology was implemented, there was a lot of foot dragging, and the people at the top of the food chain found out there were a couple of managers out there bad-mouthing the whole process and basically saying, oh, don't worry, this is just the flavor of the week and they're going to get rid of this. How are you going to evaluate what you're doing? And this is, I think, very important, that will you find ways to proactively, and this costs money, go after current customers and say, what was your experience? I know we like AppleCare. We think they generally do a very good job. And one of the most recent times we called AppleCare for something, I got the phone call the day later, and the question they asked me was, how many people did you have to talk to answer your question? And if I typed in more than one, they had more things, but I said, no, the person I talked to was the person who answered all our questions. And I thought, well, that was an interesting, question to put in. Is there training on current and new systems so that we keep upgrading people's skills? Is there time for managing technology? Or are we overreaching what it is that we can do given the time and people that we have? And is there time and place, and I think this is so important, for actually reviewing the interactions that we have with customers, that we really feel that we have a way of seeing if we're doing this right or not, and calling people and reviewing emails and chats and so on to see what kinds of questions are coming in and how are they being answered, and the tones that people are using as well. So let's start with the big picture strategic steps. Hopefully, whatever kind of organization you're with in the public, private, or nonprofit sector, it has some kind of strategic plan that basically says we're setting the big goals and the priorities about what's important. That we know our current customer base, the people who are already satisfied with what we're doing, who are probably going to be the people who are going to be most impacted by any changes that we make. So we have to start thinking about that. And then we have to look at the future. People coming to us from different backgrounds with different skill sets. For example, the more you reach beyond your fingertips into other parts of the world, that changes how you do things. For our little business, I remember the day that I got a contract out of state, and it was in Birmingham, Alabama, with a university there. And it was the first time that we did all the business for arranging my coming out and doing a training program from them online. I literally never had a phone call with the people at the other end. It was all done through email and other resources. It changed fundamentally how we ran as a business. And what are our expectations of success? How are we going to measure and describe what we do? Well, one thing is retention. People still want to do business with us. One measure is customer satisfaction. They were treated well. So these are things that we should be thinking about. And it's another reason why we might say, you know what, we're not ready to make the leap. We have to do with what we're doing right now until we have a little more of a foundation to be successful. We need to refresh our knowledge about the people we serve. And even if you've been in business as a public, private, or nonprofit sector agency or organization, please don't take for granted you know the people who are using you or why they are using you. And right now, because of all the changes that are going on in society worldwide, I'm telling my clients, you know what, I don't care if you did a strategic plan 3 months ago. I want you to do a brand new one, because the lives of the people that all of us serve, all of us, sell retail to, all of us do programming, whatever, are changing dramatically. And I spend a lot of time online and on the phone talking to long-term customers, and I'm asking them, what's changing for you? What do you need now that you didn't need 3 months ago? What are their demographics in terms of age, socioeconomic status, education? And do they currently use virtual services? And do they even want them? I think is a good question as well. We also have to think, with these services, who are we going to be serving, right? What part of the target audiences we serve are more likely to respond positively versus negatively? And we have to not just think in the short term, but also thinking about, where do we think customer service is going to be in 3, 5 years, or 10 years? And what's going to attract the people who aren't using our service, who aren't customers right now? It's interesting that I'm watching some organizations backing off from virtual customer service. I've mentioned this in other workshops, but a few years ago, our very good city government here in Denver promised that they were going to use fax machines, phone lines, and online services so nobody would have to actually come to downtown Denver to be able to get the services of the city. They moved everything online pretty aggressively. And then there came a point several years ago where they realized that if you weren't someone who had a computer and could get online, there were not library, but there were services with the city of Denver that weren't available to you. I remember there was something about a form to fill out for something, nothing really important. And I went online and I was poking around and realized if I hadn't had a computer, I wouldn't be able to fill it out. So the city of Denver has backed off from that. And now if you go to one of the division sites, they will give you a number of different ways. And they installed one of those 311 numbers to answer questions for people. Awesome, awesome. And even though I spend most of my time on my laptop, having those 311 operators who are well-trained, boy, does that make a difference in customer service. We want to talk strategically about, what will virtual service achieve? Virtual customer service is not in itself a goal. It's a means to something else. So we want to keep that mission and vision important. Is it going to be more convenient for current customers, or have we sort of decided to abandon the people who are with us because they're, quote, old-fashioned, and we want the new hip people who, know how to use all the new applications and so on? Are we looking to attract more users who are online? And so we're looking at that particular market and say, we've neglected it some. We want those people. All these kinds of questions are things that I can't answer for you, but it's things that should be discussed strategically with the people who are, again, at the top of the food chain of your agency or institution, with input from all the stakeholders, including your current personnel. Can we track records in real time? Do we need to make it so that we're pushing things out to the user so they can update and change what they need to do? For example, I remember a time a few years ago with GoToWebinar, the webinar platform, that if somebody signed up for one of the programs, only I could delete their name if I wanted to. Well, that required 2 or 3 extra emails back and forth. Now they have it, they've made it very, very easy. So if somebody wants to delete the membership or delete the fact that they're coming to one of the webinars, they can do it very easily. Doesn't sound like a big deal until you multiply that transaction by hundreds and thousands, and then you realize it can be a big deal. And how, again, do we keep records of the interactions with users? Most important, of course, with audio when we're talking to people on the phone, but do we make sure that whatever platforms and texting and messaging systems we have are available to everybody? And that anything we do online can and often will become part of public record, whether or not you work for a public service agency. So you want to make sure that there's no surprises about what was said in a transaction or interaction with a customer that's going to bite you when they come back and sue you for something, and you don't know what happened, but they have the records at their end. This happened to me about 4 years ago, where I was dealing with an organization and there were problems, and it was proven later that the person, the service rep I was dealing with, lied to me, and the amount of money was $1,000. And what was good is when they investigated it, the person who was working for the agency had deleted our emails. But guess what? I had all of my emails that I was able to share with the organization and deal with the problem. We'll just put it that way. So that's something to be thinking about. If there's a problem, do you have those records in place? Well, what about just the day-to-day, weeding the carrots at high noon kind of thing that we have to do? All right, so here's some of the questions someone like Pat Wagner is going to ask you. Who's going to be in charge? Who's going to be the person who's going to make big decisions about what you're going to do and not do? Not a committee, a human being. Do you right now, again, do we have the technical resources? Can we prioritize a list, because we don't have infinite money, about what we need to have to buy, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5? How is your tech working today? I always think it's fun to go into an organization and they are bragging about their cash register system, or they're bragging about something that has to do with technology they're using, and I say, great, let's try it out right now. And then they go, well, it's been down for a couple of days. Or the one I loved the best was in Alaska many years ago, where I said, well, can I see how this system you have for communicating across the Bering Strait with people in Russia about these environmental issues your agency is dealing with? And they said, well, we can't do that because Madge is on vacation for 2 weeks, and she's the only one in the office who knows how to fax things internationally. And this whole regional federal agency had to shut down their communication with Russia while Madge was on vacation. And yes, we run into that sometimes. What are things you have to give up to make room? Make room in your budget, make room in your time. Are you overreaching, overextending yourself, not realizing the overhead that projects like this can take, and what kind of training is needed? And sometimes you can get that from people on your staff, but that's why you want to make friends with other agencies and organizations that are usually using a similar kind of software as well. What's the customer standard? Now, this is a very simple one that I have stolen from a number of different books about customer service, and they're in order. That the standard, if you were to interview people, is first and foremost that they feel they were treated well. And for most people, and I'm going to come up with a made-up number, 85% of people are more interested if they were treated well. That's what they're going to think about, even more so than if you solve their problem. But was I treated well? Did they solve my problem? Yes, I will return and continue to use your services. And most importantly, I will recommend your business or agency to other people. So if you're looking for a simple kind of exit strategy or a simple way to talk to people about their experiences with your customer service, here's one model that you might start with that's kind of simple and clean. And usually people don't find it too tedious because it's like 1, 2, 3, 4, we're done. Thank you very much. Sometimes when you have really smart people working in a customer service area, particularly with technology, they can become indignant, particularly if they're used to being the smartest person in the room. So whatever the person says, it doesn't do good to argue with them. You can clarify something, and you might say, given what you say, this is what's going on. You might say, okay, I'm looking and I'm seeing right now that the check was cashed and I have the name on it, and we can send you an electronic copy right now because maybe you have to deal with something at your end. But don't make it a war that somehow your superiority is demonstrated by the fact that you are right and the customer is wrong. No, the customer is not always right, but don't make it a war. Make it something where you're focused, as my husband would say, I'm being unconditionally constructive and treating the person with respect. So even if they were absolutely wrong, they're able to come back and use your services again. They don't feel like, oh my goodness, boy, was I stupid. I never want to come back again. One way to think about it is what we call future pacing. So we want to teach people, if it is an argument between what your service or industry can or can't do, you can say, this is what I can do for you today. And focus on the positive. We've done informal tests with customers about using this kind of language, and you know what? Works pretty good most of the time with most people. You need to build a team so that if you have more than one person who's answering emails, answering the phone, answering instant messages, texting, whatever it is, if you have more than one person, you have to be consistent in how you're responding to people. This is where, even if you're a smart cookie, you're going to lose some of your autonomy. You want to be able to work as a team. No mind reading, meaning that you're very transparent about documenting what you're doing and how you're doing it. You don't hoard information, and no secret service secrets. Service secrets might mean something that you have figured out a workaround in terms of using a certain kind of technology, but you don't share it with other people. That's a service secret. Or you make it so that only if the person begs for something, you let them have it. So in effect, the service staff in your organization learns that they're going to get to reward people who they like with, oh, well, here's something special for you. You don't want to encourage that kind of behavior. You want to be consistent and transparent in what you do. And everyone who works for you, who answers customer service inquiries in whatever format, has to do it consistently in terms of the level of service that you offer people. And for some people, again, if we're talking about technology, um, they think it's a waste of time to connect emotionally. And I don't mean those, well, how are you today, with the perky voice, but to be able to check with the person about what they need and to be sensitive enough to listen to them. Like, are you in a hurry today? Is this something really that we need to do for you right now? Because I'm going to have to put you on hold for 5 minutes. I know a quick fix and I know a long-term fix. Do you want me to give you the quick fix right now? We'll have to come back for the longer fix, or what do you want to do? And sometimes it's just the tone of voice you use, even if it isn't the words, that, oh, I'm happy to have this phone call. Not that, oh my God, here's another customer interrupting my day. Another problem, and this again, have to make fun of our tech people, what we need to do is focus on their point of view. They may not be someone who knows much about the technical details of your service or product or what you're doing digitally. And something that I have had some conversations with my husband over the years is, no, just fix it. I don't need to know why. And the funny story we tell in our family is about my dad, who was quite brilliant, and I was homesick the week we learned long division, whatever grade that was, and I asked my daddy for help with long division. I needed him to explain long division to me. He started with pre-Mesopotamian concepts of abstraction in numbers. And by the time it was my bedtime, we were up to Maimonides and the Moorish Empire and the invention of the concept of zero. Trust me, that was the last time I ever asked my dad for help with my homework. However, maybe he did it on purpose. That just occurred to me. But I run into tech people who think that that's what the person wants. And sometimes they don't want to know why. They just like fix it so I can go back to work. I have a life here. So understanding what you need to tell people, I think, is really important. And no, you may not ever successfully educate a customer. So give that up if that's your burning goal in life. So here's some standards. We want you, when you're talking about text, emails, anything like that, to be able to have people provide a standard within your organization for subject lines so that when you have to search for things, it's done in standard English, standard language, that everyone has a salutation, a brief thank you. If they're a regular customer who you know, yeah, maybe a little quick personal connection in the first round of the conversations, that you restate the problem to make sure that you understand what's going on. You set a deadline for response, even though it's I don't know what we will be able to accomplish, but one way or another, you're going to hear from me 3 o'clock on Friday, and offer some step they can take, and then ask for feedback. Try this and get back to me. So I put together a sample text response to a query. And again, I've worked with a lot of technology consortium who have supplied computer services to libraries, universities, and local government. And so this isn't too far-fetched. And I don't usually do this, but I'm going to read the little type to you. Tech response 457, how to fix entry key issue. Hello, Chris. First, congrats on the new funding for your agency. Fixing a broken entry key can be tricky. See if this helps. As I understand, when you hit the return key with a hammer, the computer stops working. We have learned that pressing the key with your finger, nose, or elbow works better most of the time. Please try this method after the computer comes back from the repair shop and let me know if this works for you. I will check in next Monday morning if I don't hear from you before. Have a great weekend, Pat. Yeah, I've had to deal with stuff like this, right? Like, oh, how many times do I have to tell them to plug in the machine? But nonetheless, if you keep it smart and good, it works well. Now, if there's details about this response you don't like, that's okay. I'm just talking about the general thing of some kind of subject heading that is standard and can be searched by numerous people. Always start with a hello and some way to connect with people somehow in a positive way, and restating the problem. We're talking about a broken entry key, right? And then not to say, okay, and by the way, I know it's hard to tell, but I'm not being sarcastic here. I'm simply restating what the person is doing. Tell them to try something and get back to you, and then establish a deadline that if I don't hear from you in this period of time, then, we'll take the initiative to check with you, right? And that taking the initiative is so important in so much of what we do in customer service. No-nos we've talked about before. You don't blame the customer. Don't blame the customer. And if they keep forgetting to put the plug in the machine, let's just assume they have a busy, crazy life, okay? Please don't use technical jargon unless there's someone who likes technical jargon. My husband intervened when I was having trouble with the help desk a few years ago, and he was very nice to them. But finally he said, I've been in computers 30 years, and if this is the language you're using with the average person, I understand why your company's in trouble. They did eventually go bankrupt. It shouldn't be too long. It shouldn't be like hundreds of words. You want to make sure that you do have some sort of deadline or follow-up of when you're going to get back to them. And you want to make sure that you're not the lone eagle coming up with clever ways to deal with things that isn't according to the work order response that you've come up with as a group. So a little structure really helps everyone. We have to know, and if I came to work for you at a service desk, these are some of the things I'd need to know in terms of email and such. When do I refer it up the food chain to people who can make bigger, more expensive decisions? how we collect useful and successful answers. I had this incredible employee named Toby who was amazing at virtual customer service because he had trained with some big companies. And I would get so much praise from our customers about Toby's response to their tech problems that I would print out his emails. Yes, I'd kill trees and share them with the rest of the staff. And I'd say, look at what Toby did. And they said, this is great. Wow. And I'd say, all right, why do you think it's great? And we'd actually deconstruct what he did and think about how we could all improve because of that. Make sure that we have a regular meeting to say, what kind of problems do people have, and look for patterns. We want to identify and recruit the best users we have to see if they can help us improve what we do as well. And we always want to be anticipating problems to be able to communicate, not to wait until there's a disaster, but to encourage people who work in customer service, including virtually, to say, here's an issue that's coming up a lot. Maybe we need to check to see if it's the customer or if it really is the technology, which it often is. Phone conversations. If you have to initiate a phone conversation, you might double check because people are busy. When would be a good time to call? And sometimes I create a window. What's an hour when we can call? I want to make sure I'm prepared and that I have notes that I've taken. Actually, I have a 9 o'clock appointment with a client tomorrow morning where we're going to be discussing these issues. When you call our office, I say, hello, Pattern Research. This is Pat. I don't go into a long, pattern research and go through our mission or vision statement or anything like that. I will ask if I have to initiate the call if this is a good time, right? It's just all of that courtesy that I think a lot of people don't have much experience with anymore because they're mostly texting. They're mostly texting. To make sure we know what is it that we're supposed to accomplish and then follow up. Right, with a text or something in print. This is what we said in the conversation. This is what we're going to do next. And yes, I know it sounds so dorky, but it does change the sound of your voice if you smile. And that's why when you go into call centers, they have these things about smile and they have mirrors in front of people. And I've done tests with groups where I've had people smile and not smile with their back to the audience, and the audience can tell. The audience can tell when they're smiling or not. So does a person's voice have energy, like they're not half asleep? Is the vocal variety, are they monotone and they just talk like this? Or do they make it interesting? Hello, how are you, right? Without being perky or phony. Are they articulate? And these next two really address people like me who are hard of hearing. You don't have to speak louder, but what I want you to do is to not mumble and to not go so fast that I can't, keep up with what you're saying, particularly phone numbers, addresses, numbers that I have to write down. Give me a break. So we want people, the way a friend of mine calls it, we want them to stay alive if they have to have a phone call with someone, voice to voice. Talk slower, pause, enunciate. I just had a client who was having terrible time communicating, and her big epiphany was, I guess when I'm using my cell phone, or I guess when I'm using my speakerphone, other people can't hear me. I've got my headset on. How does that work? And yes, you can get really good headsets secondhand, cheap, online. You don't have to spend a bundle of money, but it makes all the difference, Okay, some other things to think about. Breathe slower and more deeply, particularly if you find yourself being anxious about what the other person is saying. If you're angry because they're not treating you politely, for example, or you feel impatient, take a couple of breaths. If you're working in a room with other people, maybe it will work to refresh your point of view by switching seats with the person. I mean, literally, it sounds weird, but just changing up something about your physical environment can refresh your response, whether you're talking to people on the phone or answering email. Sometimes we just tell people to stand up, to have a stand-up desk that they can use a few minutes every hour if it's comfortable for them. Changing position changes energy. We want a work order standard for for writing down the details of what's going on. And sometimes you need a prop, and props for me are a nice photo of yourself, your family, your pets, something that you love that you can look at, and it actually makes a difference in how you feel and how you treat other people. So here's a couple of lists of some of the typical problems and some solutions to think about. Software and hardware failures. Obviously, you need more time testing, and testing with people who don't know the system. They're not intimate with how the system operates, and so they're looking at it fresh eyes, and they'll point out things to you that you might not be able to see. Delays in response to what people are asking for, and this is really hard in what we call a bridge situation. And bridges in customer service is when you install new hardware, software, procedures that are working too well, and you kind of get this flood of inquiries, but you don't necessarily have more income coming in right away if you're a business, for example. And this is particularly true of public sector clients, where that's great. We have 3 times as many people asking us for help, but it's not like the private sector that means more money for us, so we're overwhelmed. So you may have to set and renegotiate the standards you have internally and externally. And all I ask you is to keep to them and communicate them up the food chain. So you can say to people honestly, and I've been there where we've had to say to the people with the check, you know, who's going to write the check, right now, based on our service standards, we can't respond to people in sooner than a week. And if you want us to respond sooner, we're going to need more resources about stuff. And I say this because too many times people beat themselves up like there's something wrong with them. And no, there's nothing wrong with you. It's oftentimes that what you want to do in life is not supported. Maybe there is poor staff communication going on, and so there needs to be monitoring, evaluating, and improving, which might mean here's the standard by which we want to do things and we want to improve. If you're indifferent to how people are treating your customers are going to get the message and they're going to go away or complain. And as I said in the beginning, don't expect quick money savings. This is part of the big plan about better customer service, being able to deal with more people better, but it doesn't mean necessarily that the agency or institution or business is going to save money in the short term at all. So here's some next steps. I really think that it's easy these days to find other people who are using the same hardware and software and figure out how they're doing things better, to create these test periods, right? Enlisting customers to say, okay, we're going to roll out this feature. Could 5 of you jump in and help us test it? And I have lists of people that I do email and say, we're running a test, and I'm rarely turned down. We make it short and fun and thank them and so on. When we start trying to figure out what to fix, we set our goals and priorities and fix one thing at a time, right? And there will be, in most cases, an accumulative effect and everything gets better. And we have to assume that sometimes the problem we have, as I say once again, that money and time are the issues that we have to deal with. So we have a little bit of time left. I just want to look up here and take a look. And I'm not perfect at Zoom, so I have to kind of click some things and make sure that I can see what's going on here. And I went out, I apologize for that. I'm just going to come back to the front of my slideshow. And there we go. Thank you. I'm going to take a look at the chats and see if there were anything here. We have 2 comments here. I don't see any chats that have come in or any questions that have come in from our participants today. And so we have a minute. Does anyone here have any questions or comments that they might want to put in, those of you who are doing from Zoom? Wow, this is outstanding. Well, whoever Tracy is, thank you very much. Appreciate that. You know, it's hard-won experience, right? So this is what happens when you're a participant or an observer from both sides, from being a customer and again, running customer service programs for a long time. Anyone else have any comments from our Zoom participants? Very good. Let's see. Do I have any resources for? No, I don't. And part of it is I'm not smart enough to take the time to deal with all the different permutations of how you have your hardware and software set up. So I don't use those services. So that wouldn't be very good. Share the slides. This is something that the good folk at DoSpace can do. Well, thank you. Yeah, I do try. Appreciate your focus on providing good customer service. Thank you very much. And again, I thank you for the idea that I'm an expert, but it really is, I'm just like everybody else, you know, there's a little blood on the papers I work with. So thank you very much. And very good. We can, hello to dospace.org. We can send the slides. Very good. Thank you, folks. And I'll turn things back over to the great DoSpace staff.
Thank you, Pat. We appreciate it. Like I said in the chat, if you want to copy the slides, please email hello@dospace.org and we can send them to you. And thank you guys very much for attending today.